But now I would like to invite Senator Ratna Omidvar, who is a member of the World Refugee and Migration Council and an independent Canadian senator. Senator, please go ahead.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you, colleagues and friends from all over the world who are joining us today. It is indeed, I think, a testament to the timeliness of this conversation hosted by the World Refugee and Migration Council that we have individuals and institutions joining us from the US, Indonesia, Sri Lanka, Denmark, US, Australia, Colombia, and of course, Canada. And this, by the way, is not the complete list. We also have with us today international organizations such as the UNHCR, the IOM, UNICEF, as well as government agencies and universities. My name is Ratna Omidvar. I am joining you from Toronto, Canada, and I am an independent senator in the Parliament of Canada. More relevant, though, for this conversation is my long-standing engagement with refugee law, refugee policy, and refugee matters, both in Canada and internationally. But perhaps the most personally meaningful thing I have ever done is sponsor 16 refugees since 2015. The first family arrived in 2016 and is now well on its way. They spoke no English when they arrived, but today the principal working member of the family has a union job. They have bought a home in Toronto. They are citizens, and I know are looking forward to voting in our next election, which is a couple of weeks ago. So I would say, what more could a sponsor or a country want? As background to this personal effort, I co-founded Lifeline Syria in 2015 to help bring Syrian refugees to Canada through the private sponsorship program. And just last week, Lifeline Afghanistan was launched. I must admit that sponsoring refugees can become somewhat addictive. I am enormously proud that this idea of ordinary citizens stepping forward, welcoming and settling refugees originated in Canada. It caught fire across our country and is in fact traveling across the world. We know that good ideas have long legs, and this one certainly sprints. I believe, however, that it is not just an expression of compassion and humanity, but also a unique and successful experiment in nation building. In 1978, as a response to the massive numbers of people who were displaced from Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, Canadians sponsored 35,000 people from Southeast Asia. Close to half of the Syrian refugees who arrived in Canada between 2015 and 2019 were privately sponsored. And to date, this public-private partnership has brought more than 327,000 refugees to a new life in our country. But also significant is that more than 2 million Canadians have sponsored refugees, and regardless of where they are and who they are, they share in this. And I know that regardless of where I am in Canada, there is likely a sponsor like me to talk to and connect to and have coffee with. Now to reality. There are currently more than 20 million refugees registered globally with the UN Refugee Agencies. But there are troublingly few countries that are willing to provide them opportunities to resettle. And many countries that are located in a particular geography like Turkey, Pakistan, Iran are already hosting large numbers of refugees without enough international support to help them do so. And with new crises in Afghanistan and elsewhere around the world, the number of refugees is only going to continue. So, new pathways to protect and resettle Afghans and millions of other refugees are urgently needed, and making them a reality will require broad support from the public, from citizens, and from governments. Today's discussion will focus on how private and community sponsorship of refugee initiatives, such as those in Canada and elsewhere, have been successful in finding new homes for refugees while enabling host communities to be part of the solution. And I think that is the magic. but we'll also discuss ways how these initiatives can be built on, expanded, and improved. We have an excellent panel to lead us through this discussion, and they are Najiba Vazifadost, an Afghan refugee who sought asylum in Australia in September 2000 with her family at the age of 14 without speaking any English. After spending months in mandatory migration detention, she was finally recognized as a refugee and has gone on to complete a Bachelor's of Medicine degree and has become a leading advocate for refugees around the world. She has helped launch refugee-led groups, including the Asia Pacific Network of Refugees and the Global Independent Refugee Women Leaders GIRL Network, and played a leadership forum at the 2019 Global Refugee Forum. Welcome, Najiba. Jennifer Bond is a personal hero of mine. She is the founder and managing director of the University of Ottawa Refugee Hub and chair of the Global Refugee Sponsorship Initiative. She is also a board member and refugee fund advisor with Airbnb, which recently said it will offer accommodation for 20,000 Afghan refugees. In between 2015 and 2016, Professor Bond served on a full-time basis as a special advisor to Canada's Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship on Canada's Operation Syria project, a project which engaged 2 million Canadians and brought 40,000 refugees to Canada in under 4 months. John Slocum has served as interim executive director of Refugee Council USA since January 2021 and is a non-resident senior fellow at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. John has been a consultant to foundations and not-for-profits, providing strategic planning and executive recruitment services in the fields of migration, refugees, and human rights. From 2006 to 2016, he was the program director for grant-making initiatives on international migration and U.S. immigration policy at the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation. And finally, Jane Fleming is a human rights lawyer and director of international refugee protection programs at Reed Smith LLP, which leads LAMP Lifeboat Ladder, a public-private partnership aiding refugees who have survived torture and trauma to discover a new life by supporting their resettlement to Canada and other safe countries. So this, colleagues, is your panel. Now you know them. I'm going to throw them questions. We're going to talk in Q&A mode for 45 minutes or so before we throw open the questions to you. Do remember to type in your questions in the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So let's begin first with Najiba. Najiba, since Taliban have taken control of Afghanistan and thousands of Afghanistan have fled the country across land borders and the air bridge, the UNHCR has said that nearly 400,000 were forced from their homes since the beginning of the year, joining 2.9 million Afghans already internally displaced across the country since 2020. And 80% of nearly 250,000 people have been forced to flee. And a huge percentage of these are women and children. So through your network in and around Afghanistan, you have been able to quickly get assistance, including food and legal support to groups of women in Mashhad, Iran, for example. Can you tell us more about what is happening on the ground for Afghan refugee women and how you were able to support them and get them help?
Thank you so much, Senator Omidvar, for actually having me also part of this panel, as well as huge thanks to WRMC, the World Refugee Migration Council, for again organizing such important webinar on sponsorship and what role the community can play in supporting the Afghanistan crisis. We all know that Afghanistan right now is sitting already in a very dangerous point. You know, with the withdrawal of foreign forces, many people have feared, you know, the prospect of resurgence of the Taliban. But to be honest, few people were pessimistic enough to believe that the Taliban would regain control over the country so quickly. The people of Afghanistan, we all know, have experienced 40 years of displacement, and it is horrifying to see, you know, the rapid escalation of human sufferings and displacement within the country. And I have to say, this is in addition to drought displacement that we are talking about. This is in addition to food insecurity. This is in addition to COVID ravaging into the country. As you already mentioned, Senator, many Afghans from provinces under the threat have already moved internally. Others with the means available have tried to leave the country to Pakistan, Iran, or Turkey, Tajikistan, or elsewhere. In all of this, I have to say, we are particularly concerned for the safety of women and girls and other human rights defenders in Afghanistan. I have to say it is the worst security situation ever for women and girls in the country. They have lost hope for peace and stability. A lot of them already have been speaking to us and telling us that they're again finding themselves as prisoners of their own gender. Many have been telling us that it's no longer about the progress of their rights, it's more about survival. We know that, again, outspoken women rights, women politicians, countless women leaders and feminist activists who have helped drag Afghanistan into the 21st century are really facing right now the fight of their lives. Women are being told to stay homes unless they're accompanied by a male relative. Women are, we've seen cases within APNOR itself, you know, that have been forcibly asked to marry off to the Taliban fighters, again, which I think is itself is a form of rape. You know, we worry that the borders which are closing in response to the pandemic is preventing people, Afghan people, from fleeing violence and persecution, from finding safety. We worry that refugees that are living, you know, in countries like Australia, in countries like Malaysia or Indonesia, or in any parts of the world, whether it's in Greece or other countries, you know, they might not ever get to see their families again. You know, a lot of them have already been contacting us and saying that we have no idea about the whereabouts of our country, of our families in the country. We really do worry that governments that are turning inwards in their response to the crisis in Afghanistan will ignore the needs and rights of the women and girls who cannot really count on local authorities to protect them at times like this. Just today, I'm sure you all are aware, the Taliban just announced their new cabinet members, you know, and within those members of the cabinet, we clearly saw that there is again an announcement of senior terrorist leaders that are going to run the country. And again, for us, there was no surprise to see that there was no inclusion of women whatsoever. We know this very well. You know, it was exactly the same reasons that I and my family fled Afghanistan in the year of 2000 and seek refuge by boat to Australia. We know that it's not going to be Taliban's practice to talk to women. It is not going to be Taliban's practice to bring women into peace negotiation, or, you know, to allow them to have access to votes or to employment or to education. It has been quite heartbreaking for us in the past few weeks, in particular in APNOR. We have launched an Afghan crisis helpline, and through this crisis helpline, we've been receiving vast amount of calls, you know, basically people reporting to us about executions, about beatings of women, you know, in protests, about clamps down on media, you know, reporting about Taliban's door-to-door searches, targeted killings and looting in the capitals. We've seen hospitals, schools, and thousands of homes being attacked. All the roads leading to and going out to the cities are really closed by the Taliban. We've got, you know, we've been trying to communicate to hospitals at the same time in ensuring that families are actually able to receive medicines and supports. But unfortunately, hospitals have been telling us that they have reached full capacity and can no longer accept patients. You know, the available food supply in the city is fastly diminishing, as well as a shortage of medical supply. This is really what we are facing right now, you know, beyond the persecution and killings that's happening in the country. Afghans right now needs protection more than ever. and the neighboring countries have responded to this crisis, as I mentioned, by closing, bolstering or arming their borders. Even the countries that have been more vocally receptive to fleeing Afghans have set low caps on the number of refugees being allowed into their country. For example, in Australia, we've heard a number of 3,000. I do have to say that it has it's such a low number, or even Canada. I mean, we've been quite excited and welcomed, Canada to actually accepting 20,000 refugees. And again, I think we're talking about really making a dent in the over 3 million Afghan refugees currently in need, and there are likely many more, to follow in coming months. So this distressing context is something of which we are all aware, but despite the challenges, there are credible policy options available to international community to help protect Afghans, to secure safe passages for those that seek refuge, and to hold new governing powers in Kabul to account. It is such leadership that the key international actors, be it at the UN Security Council or the G7, have so far failed to uphold. I fear the consequences of inaction will be felt far beyond Afghanistan's borders. As the underlying norms and democratic values we collectively believe in are at real stake. We need action, and that is action now. We've been able to support, we've been able to act immediately as we saw a huge withdrawal of INGOs from the ground. We saw a big evacuation of not only, a few of Afghans from the country, but to be honest, we've heard from a lot of INGOs who were partners with us, have had no option than actually leaving the country immediately. And that really left people again to respond to the crisis on their own. We still have few INGOs that are working on the ground, but I have to be honest, even with those few INGOs, it's quite difficult for them to risk their own lives and go to remote areas where there's even higher presence of Taliban. I mean, right now we have very little media coverage in Kabul in terms of what the Taliban is actually doing, but there's so much more to that people are actually reporting to us, again, through the crisis helpline, through emails, through forums and dialogues that we've had with people in the country. And very soon you're going to hear from Sakina, also who's going to talk to us directly from Kabul and has been a great volunteer in what we do. We've been able to really support a lot of women and children who have been displaced in Kabul, to put them into an immediate, safe and secure shelter, in ensuring that there is, some time for them to survive. For us, the main focus was to actually build confidence and bring hope in order for them to survive the current crisis right now. And we've been doing it, in a way that they're able to have access to basic nutrition. I mean, in one hand, we're dealing with the Taliban who's doing the killing and persecution, and on the other hand, we're hearing from people having basically access to no food at all. People are telling us, literally, women have told us in the last few weeks that, on one hand, they're facing the threat of being killed by the Taliban, and then on the other hand, they're actually facing the threat of dying of hunger and starvation. The country is literally having nothing to survive. There's not enough supplies, there's no import or exports, and people are basically having nothing to rely on. And with that, what APNOR has done is to basically immediately to support families and women into providing them safe shelter. But then at the same time, we've seen a huge number of families trying to evacuate and flee Afghanistan by land. We've been basically hearing from so many families also going to Pakistan as well as to Iran. Right now in Iran, in Mashhad, we've got 87 families that are sitting in our shelter. People who have basically wasn't able to come through the right channels in a way. We've been hearing that some of the our neighboring governments are basically saying that they would be receptive, they would be opening their borders to Afghans, but for us, when? It's the time that we are talking about. How quickly can we actually adapt a process that we will be able to bring people to safety? So I'm talking about 87 families who have only been able to make it to Mashhad. And then at the same time, we're talking about another 20 families just in the last 1 week that reached to Quetta in a new place where they're actually knocking on our door and asking for somewhere to stay, in order for them to make, a decision about their lives. But then similarly in the Kabul right now, and Sukaina will talk to this, we've got almost 200 high-profile women leaders at risk. And we've been trying so hard in the past months to advocate about these high-profile women leaders to governments like Canada, to governments like Australia, to ensure that there is some protection pathways for them. I think it's so important, the theme and the purpose of this webinar is how do we ensure that we can expand our protection pathways? How can we look at complementary pathways to support these women? And I think community sponsorship is one of the main solutions to this. We've got high-profile women leaders, those that have worked in ex-presidential office, those that have been part of the media reports, and many, many others, and they haven't had the chance to actually claim their protection cases. So for us is, how can we bring our efforts and how can we collaborate, together with the Canadians in ensuring that at least, when we are looking at resettling any Afghans from the country, we're not leaving any women and girls and children left behind. If you look at the images in the airport, you see thousands of men, around the airport. How many women do you actually see is a question in people's mind. And again, this is not that the rest of those thousands are not at risk, but I'm talking about, what kind of channels or routes did we even actually create for women to evacuate from Kabul? Even the evacuation process itself was a huge mess. If we look at it, the way US or other countries actually did, there was no priority given to women and girls, and many were actually resulted in real persecution and death while they were trying to get out through that airport. So for me, I really want to use this webinar as an opportunity to bring real dialogue and conversation around how community sponsorship could actually bring some protection pathways to those women that we have identified, whether they are the ones in Kabul or those in Mashhad.
Thank you, Najiba. Najiba, you mentioned that you had a volunteer who was, I think you said, in Afghanistan, or is she able to speak now? Would you like to try and get her into the conversation?
Sure. We've got Sukaina with us. So she has been an excellent volunteer in supporting us to distribute the emergency relief in Kabul. So I'm hoping she's able to hear me now. Her internet does interrupt, so I'll just call upon her. Sukaina? Sukaina, agar sadai man mishnavi, unmute ko. Can you hear me? Okay. Mikhai gap bazan shuru ko, like you can start speaking. Thank you. Just speak loud, buland gap bazan, Sukaina. Sukaina?
In the name of Allah, hello everyone. I wish all you fine.
Najiba, I'm afraid she
Hello?
is... Sukaina?
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you, Sukaina. Bale darem, Sukaina.
Hello?
Sukaina, sadai mar darim, we can hear you.
In the name of Allah. Hello everyone. I wish all you fine. Hello?
Gab zada buru ma mishnaim, lazim nist gab zada buru. Sorry, I just had to say that in my language.
Hello? Sadai mar darim?
Sadai ta.
My name is Sukaina Nazari. I am from Hazara Shia background. Today, I am speaking to you directly from Kabul. I thank Najiba and Ibnur for. It's very hard for me to speak English, but I will do my best in few words. First, I have to tell you my country, Afghanistan, in the war situation. Ever for as women, we are no longer safe. Many women and children have left their homes and have come to Kabul. If it wasn't for the immediate support of IGNOR, many of these women and children who are in IGNOR's shelter would have been died by now. On one hand, we have the Taliban killing whoever comes on their ways and on the other. Hand, we are facing shortage of food and supplies. Through the support of IGNOR, we have been able to provide so far emergency food packages in 3 main cities so far, including Kabul, Bamyan, Mazar Sharif. Many international organizations have left and another view. Where each they can not risk their lives remote area for us our server has been dependent on IGNOR so far.
Maybe I think we are not having good
support.
Yeah, may I propose, Najeeba, that we carry on with the conversation,
which include
because we are unable to really hear her. But I so appreciate Najeeba and Sukena, I want to thank you both for giving us a window into the world of what is happening in Afghanistan, especially with girls and women. It is truly searing. And you are absolutely right, Najeeba, that resettlement is a tiny slice of the whole pie, but it is an important slice. And I want to move on with questions to Jennifer Bond and John Slocum at this point about the potential of resettlement, even if it's for a tiny slice of the whole pie. I want to recognize that. So Jennifer, first to you, as we've clearly heard this really searing eyewitness account of what's happening in Kabul. I wonder if you could comment on the timeliness of whatever efforts by whatever governments to resettle refugees, and whether, in my experience, time was our enemy. It took time to process the papers. It took time to confirm the identity, to clear security. It took time to do the medical tests, etc., etc. How should governments, in your view, accelerate this process, whether it's linked to private sponsorships or just regular refugee resettlement programs? Because time is not waiting for these women and girls in Kabul and outside.
Great, thank you, Senator. And I too want to thank Najiba and Sukhana for such incredible remarks. And I think they really do remind us about what is at stake and the importance of a multi-pronged solution to the unfolding tragedy. So I want to acknowledge and thank them for their contributions today, but more significantly for the incredible work they're clearly both leading to try to offer protection and, as we heard from Najiba, hope during this crisis. So thanks to both of them for their leadership and for helping frame the rest of the conversation today in such a powerful way. I think, Senator, that one of the things that for me is most powerful about sponsorship and resettlement more broadly is its ability to tie together the power of your opening reflections, which talked about your personal experiences as a welcomer, with the power of what we've just heard about the incredible need on the ground. And for me, at its best, community sponsorship programs, which can be defined in many ways and taking many different shapes all around the world. For me, what they are at their core is a flexible policy tool that can allow us to empower communities, empower people like yourself and the people that you've been referencing all across Canada, but in fact, they exist all over the world, to empower them to welcome some of these brave people that we've just heard about and from on the ground as new neighbors. That's what sponsorship should be and can be about. And I think it is also very powerful for a reason that you mentioned, which is equally important, which is it can bring together welcoming communities in a way that allows us to sustain and grow the welcoming. And I think that's really important. It increases reception capacity in the short term. And I'll speak in a moment to what we're seeing globally and why I think it's such an important tool right now for this moment. But it's not only about the short term. And I think those numbers that you mentioned from Canada in 2015 and 16 really need to be highlighted. 2 million Canadians directly sponsored refugees in just a couple of years. Polling data shows us that another 7 million Canadians supported those sponsors. They knew someone who sponsored. They offered the car seat for the kid. They provided language support over a cup of coffee. They helped people get oriented to their new neighborhood. That's 9 million Canadians who were directly involved or indirectly supporting welcome. And that is incredibly powerful. And it extends us beyond the moment of crisis and into what are we becoming as a country? What are we doing and creating as a country through this crisis, but also beyond it? There's another number coming out of Canada in 2015 and 16 that I think is equally important. And that is the number of communities, physical locations who are engaged in this. Like most other countries, our traditional resettlement program relies on professional agencies that are in particular geographies. We have somewhere between 35 and 40 of those in Canada. And those agencies do a tremendous job at welcoming our government-assisted refugees. And through sponsorship, Operation Syria was able to open to the entire country. And we saw newcomers arriving to over 400 communities. And that is part of what allows it to become a truly national project, what allows it to become a sustained form of nation building that transforms our societies. So I think it's a bridge between what we just heard and the incredible need and the incredible welcome, trying to create those bridges in a sustained way. But it's also about changing our societies and becoming more welcoming to refugees in the longer term. And I think it's a lot to layer onto one idea, to one policy setting, but I think sponsorship has the potential to let us do both of those things. And I really want to emphasize how important I think that is in this moment. If I may just speak to a few particular circumstances that I think are very relevant right now, and then I'll close, Senator, with your really hard question important question too, on what governments need to do right now to make these programs viable. And then I'm delighted to also hear from John. There's so much happening in the United States, so I'll look forward to sort of hopefully setting up some remarks from him on that particular country context. But I think globally, one of the common threads of this moment is the pace of arrivals in what I very much hope is phase one, and that is evacuation. And I'm emphasizing that because, as we've heard, there's a lot of people who still need help. There's a lot of people left behind, and there's a lot of people in neighboring countries. So governments must do more. There must be phase two and phase three. But phase one has been a tremendously accelerated evacuation effort. We know that there's over 125,000 people who have been taken out of Afghanistan that are now all over the world. We're expecting close to 65,000 arrivals just in the United States before the end of September. That is a tremendous pace of arrival, and that is a key circumstance to this particular moment. And it's going to strain our traditional reception systems. It's going to strain the resettlement agencies who are at the front line of this work. But critically, it's also going to strain the particular geographies that we often rely on to welcome and integrate refugees. It's going to strain our public schools and our housing, and it's going to strain our healthcare systems and social services. So that is a policy context. We're on the ground talking to governments around the world, and every government who's dealing with a big accelerated arrival due to, again, I'll insist, phase one evacuations is going to deal with a strain on its reception capacity. And that's a really important piece of this moment. The second thing is the caseload, both the caseload in phase one evacuation and, again, what I hope is the caseload, the need, the people who we might be seeking to resettle in phases two and phase three. A huge number of these individuals have ties outside of the region. And what that means in practice is if you talk to people in Canada, in the United States, in Australia, across Europe, in the UK, all of these places, there are lists, spreadsheets in Excel that name individual humans who urgently need protection. And they are coming forward from welcomers, from potential welcomers, from people who care and are connected to those individuals on the ground in receiving states. And that is not always the case. We don't always have such strong ties. But because there has been so much democracy building work and military work in Afghanistan for so many years, there's a lot of people who know someone in particular that they care about and that they are seeking to try to support in this moment of tragedy. And that's a really important policy context. And third is there is just a general huge mobilization in this moment all across the world. And I'm sure John will speak more to what's happening in the United States. I'll just say it is global and it cuts across political lines. So I actually was speaking on the media in Korea recently, and Korea is not known for having a huge refugee resettlement program. And I thought, it would be interesting to sort of, what is the conversation in Korea? And I was the third story. I was speaking about Airbnb's housing offer. And the first two stories were, one, largest evacuation in the country's history. And two, streets flooded with people with banners of welcome, kids, Korean kids, there with teddy bears to welcome Afghan arrivals. That is something incredibly special and unique in this moment. It is the light in the darkness of this moment. And I think it's incumbent on us to make sure that we organize and sustain and leverage that, because there is so much power in it. And again, I'll loop back, not only for the short term, but if we're smart about this, this is something that we should be really stewarding to make sure that these allies and champions stay with us beyond the current crisis. So I'll close by saying that I think all of these factors really favor some form of policy that connects welcomers with the people that they are mobilized to support. And that's the challenge for those of us who work on the face of policy design. We've got to take this moment. We've got to see the opportunity in this moment to try to connect those dots and take some really bold steps. But I think storytelling is an equally important part. And I will say that part of what was so special for those of us who lived through Canada in 2015-16 was the storytelling that started at the very local level in our local communities about the welcome. And we started to read not only about the tragedy overseas, but about how our neighbors were standing up and welcoming people in airports and on the ground and through bake sales and in the local community. And I think that part is critical. It's an important thing that sponsorship lets us do, create those local welcomes, but we've got to tell the stories in a way that we recognize ourselves in what's happening across this moment. You asked me a hard question and I've been avoiding it for the last few minutes. So I'm going to come back to it to say, yes, I think we need to introduce sponsorship programs. We're working hard to try to encourage governments and communities to connect the dots in whatever way makes sense for their national context. But this is the moment. This is a big moment. We should be seizing it for all of the policy reasons that I've pointed to. We need to tell the stories, but first we need to make sure we empower our communities to welcome. But we need government policy that first lets it happen, and second, that lets it happen in a timely way. So accelerated processing is going to be critical. There's lots of ways that can happen. Governments have been experimenting throughout COVID with different ways of doing screening. You can experiment with concurrent steps in the process. You're doing a bunch of things, health and security and other kinds of screening at the same time instead of in a sequence. You know, you can be innovative with how you are identifying cases and who your partners are on the ground to make sure that those people are cleared to come into our countries. There's lots of things. And I will say this is a moment where the global cooperation around the evacuations has been tremendous. And I think if the global community decides to solve together, how do we make phase 2 accelerated and powerful, we can solve the problems that you're pointing to around, you know, how do processing times become more efficient so that we can not only enable welcome, but enable it to happen soon. Thanks.
Thank you, Jennifer. That was really wonderful and hopeful bookend to or second chapter to our discussion. Over to John. John, Jennifer just noted that 65,000 Afghan refugees have already arrived in the United States, and the United States has sort of, you know, meandered, if I may use that word, on refugee policy under the leadership in the previous presidential term. Can you tell us what is happening now on the United States on this file, and what are the challenges and opportunities that you see in the US, both politically and institutionally, to further resettlement through private sponsorship?
Well, thank you, Senator. And I want to begin by just referencing the comments already been made by my fellow panelists, and gratitude to you and to WRMC for setting up this event today. Frankly, hearing from Najima and Sukaina about the situation on the ground is so heartrending that you know, it's the least that those of us that live in comfort can do to extend whatever help we can. It's also humbling to follow Jennifer Bond, who is probably the leading technical specialist on community sponsorship, not just in North America, but globally. But I'll do what I can to talk about the effort in the United States. Maybe just a quick word about Refugee Council USA, which I'm representing on this call, and then I'll talk about the context and current developments in the United States. Refugee Council USA is a coalition, a nonprofit association that's a coalition of 27 member agencies. These include all 9 of the national resettlement agencies that are the linchpin of our reception and placement program of the U.S. refugee program, and that has been in place since 1980, having been set up shortly after the exodus of refugees from Southeast Asia. In addition to the resettlement agencies, our coalition also includes 18 other nonprofits, from the very large to the very small, all of whom are engaged in one way, shape, or form in advocating for providing service to refugees and other displaced populations. The context that we're in today in the United States, Senator, you used the term meander to describe the Trump administration's treatment of the refugee program. That is the gentlest term of description I've yet heard.
Like Canadian.
Yeah, I'm going to be a blunt American and say that they did their best to try to dismantle that system. And but that was only part, I think, of historical arc that it sort of explains where we are today. The United States has been, until Canada, frankly, eclipsed us in recent years, the world's largest country of resettlement. That's something to be proud of, but it's something to be humble about given the extent of the need and the fact that we are not the world's largest per capita country of resettlement. And needless to say, given the huge burden and responsibility and frankly unfunded mandate that rests on the shoulders of the immediate neighbors of countries where refugees are fleeing, there's so much more that we can be doing. Having said that, the resettlement system that was set up in the United States has from the outset included an element of community support. It was born out of family support for Vietnamese refugees in the 1970s. And this is exactly the moment that Jennifer describes, where we need to make welcoming for refugees a whole of society effort. And there are untapped energies and resources that are coming to the fore at this moment. So I want to add to the very grim background of the situation on the ground, the hopefulness that this will become a transformative moment for countries that welcome refugees. As for that historical context, with the professionalized refugee resettlement service, which has been very effective in the United States, came a bipartisan support in the US for the process of resettlement. And I frankly came from the immigration policy field before I entered into refugee affairs. And we hadn't seen in the refugee space the same kind of broad advocacy movement on behalf of refugees that there had been on behalf of immigrants. The system was seen as secure, it was in place. We had healthy quotas of welcome for refugees each year, with a small downturn in the early 2000s following 9/11. But President Obama stepped up the resettlement numbers in response to the Syrian crisis. What happened is Trump came to office riding a latent wave of concern over newcomers, frankly, minority opinion in this country, but one which became very, there was an attempt to impose a sort of official xenophobia in the United States. Add to that COVID and the way it shut down borders worldwide, and you had a resettlement system that is in need of rebuilding in this country. We had some 300 local agencies, and that number was slashed by at least a fourth, I think, in terms of local entities having to close their doors in the last few years. President Biden came to office with a pledge to rebuild this program, issued an executive order within 2 weeks that called for strengthening, rebuilding our resettlement program, and enhancing private sponsorship and initiating new program, enhancing community sponsorship and initiating new programs of private sponsorship in the United States. Just by way of definitions, we see community sponsorship in the US as sort of the overarching term, within which there's the formal agreements that some community groups have developed with local resettlement agencies as co-sponsorship, which is the more sort of robust form. But there's also private sponsorship, which does not yet have an official definition in US law. But the Biden administration had promised to set up a new private sponsorship program by the early 2022. I think events have kind of forced their hand to move up that deadline, and there are strong voices advocating for us to have a private sponsorship program very soon in response to the Afghan refugee situation. RCUSA had been involved, thanks to the generosity of a coalition of donors, in something called the Community Sponsorship Catalyst Fund. Several millions of dollars have been awarded to local resettlement agencies in the past, really just in the past year, to try to strengthen community sponsorship. There's a third round of that fund that has just been announced by those donors, and awards will be announced soon. We've set up a new entity in the US called the Community Sponsorship Hub. This is a bit of a scoop because it's officially coming out. I think it's launching tomorrow. But this is work that was incubated by Refugee Council USA and others, and there's now a new independent nonprofit that is going to be sort of spreading the word about private sponsorship and trying to engage the broadest possible coalition of private sector actors, philanthropists, corporations, individuals. So there's lots of energy behind sponsorship from sort of the side of those who are promoting this in the United States. Refugee Council USA called last Friday for the Biden administration to set a refugee admissions goal for the coming fiscal year, which begins October 1st, of 200,000, which would be the highest level in nearly 2 decades. And I think actually longer than that, but it's an important signal that while we provide welcome to Afghans, we also do not wish for that to take up slots that there are refugees waiting for resettlement, the very most vulnerable of refugees around the world. And we don't want the current Afghan situation to push aside these other populations that are also in need of third country resettlement. So some promising developments on the part of the government. The president each year does set this refugee ceiling, and President Biden had signaled that he wanted 125,000 for the coming fiscal year. We're asking for 200,000, as are many of our allies and partners. And the numbers are daunting already. You've mentioned the 65,000 Afghan refugee arrivals by the end of this month. On top of that, there are expected to be some 20,000 special immigrant visa holders. These are individuals that had assisted the U.S. mission in Afghanistan or are otherwise at risk due to their relationship with previous having been hired by U.S. contractors and NGOs and so forth. There are the family members of the SIV holders, which could number several tens of thousands more, and 50,000 Afghans on top of that are to be admitted into the country under what's known as humanitarian parole, which is just shorthand for, they don't fall under other visa categories, but the U.S. is going to be having that group enter. So the numbers, it's hard to tell where the math sort of at the end of the day lands, but it's going to be well over 100,000 Afghans coming into the country. Do we have the capacity to serve them today? We don't, but we're building it. And we've asked, the advocates have asked for a robust additional funding from the US government. We know that that's not going to be built in a day, and the private and the society-wide effort to provide welcome is such a crucial component of this. There are some promising developments. There is a nationwide effort to sort of stand up a message of welcome, and also to provide opportunities for any American, any corporation, any community faith group to get engaged. There is, encouragingly, the US government has set up through the Department of Homeland Security here what's known as the Unified Coordination Group, which is an interagency group within the government that is working with civil society on all aspects of the challenges of resettling this many incoming Afghans. The White House just a few days ago named former Delaware Governor Jack Markle as their point person. So the White House is stepping up in that respect. And but just to end on this note, this is a whole of society need right now, and a whole of society moment, and offers are pouring in to local resettlement agencies, to other nonprofits from all reaches of American society. The veterans groups have been very prominent in this, human rights groups. The Afghan American diaspora itself is a very powerful voice, which needs to be centered in all of this, and they're offering support. And then finally, by way of the storytelling piece of this, I learned just yesterday of an initiative that's taken hold in Seattle. I began by speaking of the post-Vietnam War developments. Well, Vietnamese Americans are among those who are most eager to provide welcome to Afghans in the United States. And the Seattle initiative is called 75 Viets for 75 refugee families. And the notion here is that the number 75, referring to 1975 and the fall of Saigon, is of symbolic importance to the Vietnamese American community. And they have taken to heart the need to welcome the latest refugees from war. So I'll leave it at that. I'm happy to expand further, but it's just such an honor to be on this panel. And I'm proud to say that within U.S. society, I think we're stepping up and hoping that the policy pieces that need to be in place follow suit soon.
It's such a heartening update from the United States, and that last little bit about what is happening in Seattle. I have lots of questions for both Jennifer and you, but timing, time is my enemy today here too. We really want to get to Jane Fleming. Jane, tell us about your work at Lamp Lifeboat Ladder, and how is your approach both similar or different to the sponsorship initiatives?
Thank you, Senator. And, it's so interesting. Thank you, Najiba and Jennifer and John, because listening to the comments in the beginning, what we hear is sort of the whole landscape, the panoramic view of the situation that we're in right now, and huge numbers, huge need. An overwhelming situation that sometimes can feel almost impossible to tackle. Where does a single individual start in terms of wanting to contribute? And I have many colleagues who have said, I've called organizations to volunteer or to offer help, and they're overwhelmed, they're flooded. They said, well, we'll call you when we have the capacity to take your help. So it can be really frustrating because there's this overwhelming need, and there's a real difficult time trying to connect the need with people who want to help. And I know that John and Jennifer and Najiba are working so hard with their teams to try and, bridge that gap. We're very small. We're not a huge operation. Lamp Lifeboat Ladder is a program that is in the Middle East and Europe. And we are a team that provides holistic support, which means that we meet individuals where they are on their flight. So people leave their country, people flee their country, often with smugglers, and travel through transit countries and end up somewhere, whether it's Turkey or Iran or Greece or somewhere else. Our teams are in those places. Right now we're in Greece, for example, and we meet individuals when they arrive there, and we try and provide immediate support. So the support that we provide includes immediate protection for someone. Maybe they need housing. Maybe they need support for a child who's ill. Maybe they need food. Oftentimes, when people are in transit, they have no resources. They've given all of their money to smugglers. Often they've experienced violence in transit. The smuggling route from Afghanistan, Iran, Turkey, Greece is one of the most dangerous smuggling routes in the world. Women are often raped on the borders. They're often held in sex slavery to pay their traffickers before they can get on a boat to get to Greece. So not only have they fled violence in their country of origin, but they have experienced violence in transit as well. Then they arrive in Greece, and Greece has a very severe detention policy for people who arrive by boat on islands, and so they end up in camps. Often women end up in camps with men refugees, and there's more violence in those camps. Traffickers are prevalent in Greece. So often young women are coerced into trafficking scenarios where they're told by smugglers or traffickers, we'll get you to Europe, we'll help you go to France, we'll help you go to Germany. You just have to pay your way. And paying your way means become a prostitute with us and prostitute yourself until you earn enough money to go to Europe. They never end up in Europe. They end up having their lives destroyed. So what we do, what our project does, is we have a program where we're in partnership with the government of Canada to relocate women who are victims of sexual violence from Greece to Canada. It's a very specialized program specifically for survivors of torture and survivors of sexual violence, any nationality, any gender, any age, but survivors of torture and survivors of sexual violence. So we meet people in the country when they arrive. We do the interviews, we develop the cases, we submit those applications to the government of Canada. And then when someone is able to transit to Canada, when they're able to arrive in Canada, we provide full support to them upon arrival for 2 years. It's a privately funded program. Private donors pay for the resettlement program, so it's not an additional cost to the government of Canada. We provide wraparound support again in Canada. for me, I think this fits and complements the other private resettlement programs that we've been talking about. It's small. It's a model. It's kind of a hybrid between resettlement and private sponsorship. We have the same host communities welcoming. But what the difference is that we're trying to identify people earlier on the point of flight in order to really capture those people who are most vulnerable and make sure that they can get safety too. That we're not just waiting for our governments to sort of escort people on kind of this pathway, who often those are the ones who are safest because they're maybe in a camp or an airport hangar in Germany waiting for resettlement. But what about the woman who's on the border with Iran and Turkey, at risk of smuggling and trafficking, or the child who fell off the boat in the Mediterranean and died? So that's what Lamplight Boat Ladder is. I think, as I said, the opportunity to help can seem super overwhelming. It can seem like there's nothing we can do, but I think everyone has a role, everyone has a place, and everyone can do something. And I think that's the cry of this panel today is let's just do something, even if it's a small thing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jane. We are now into audience questions and answers. I have a number of questions. I'm going to start with a question for Najeeba. We have heard that even though Canada has agreed to take 20,000, and depending on the election, we may double that number, and the United States is really stepping up its ante. That's wonderful to hear. And the UK has, or Germany, sorry, has also agreed to take in a certain number. The numbers are minuscule in light of the scale of need. Do you believe it is time for the UNHCR to organize a pledging conference of member states so that, as we have done in the past? And do you believe that there is enough push to get this done by member states?
Thank you very much, Senator. I think there's so much that UNHCR can do, and UNHCR should definitely play an important role in this. We strongly believe that UNHCR must act quickly and influence the situation before states have solidified their policies towards Afghan refugees. Already, many states have reacted to the expected surge of refugees by saying that they will close their borders. So I think it's really about UNHCR to act before the rhetoric like this is acted upon. I think there's few things that UNHCR can do. Definitely, I think what our colleague is saying in relation to a pledging conference for the states. I think what the first thing that UNHCR should do is about coordinating a multi-stakeholder response to Afghan conflicts. This will really help ease pressure on the host countries, the first major tenet of the global compacts on refugees. We know that as UNHCR itself has noted, less than a quarter of the 193 UN member states bear the lion's share of responsibility for refugees, either in providing accommodation or financial support for displaced persons. A multi-stakeholder response then will establish the international situations where host countries are overburdened by an influx of refugees, which sours public opinion towards them. And I think secondly is about, the UN Security Council to pass a resolution calling for multilateral coordinated support for Afghan refugees. So this action itself, will ensure that the legal and the moral responsibility of states to allow those fleeing Afghanistan to seek safety is not merely an altruistic aspiration of UNHCR, but a concrete reality. So there's so much that UNHCR can do. And I think lastly, I would say is more about meaningfully engage refugees, especially Afghan refugees, in designing the UNHCR response to the Afghan crisis. So since the global compacts on refugees came into effect, UNHCR has already touted refugee participation as a priority of their organization, and for good reason. As people who have gone through the refugee process ourselves, we provide crucial insights when it comes to the needs of the people we serve. So I think it's really about the time to realize this promise. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. That was a very fulsome answer, and I really appreciate that. I have a question for both Jennifer and John. You've talked about community sponsors, about neighbors, about institutions gathering together. I'm curious about the role of employers in private sponsorship. And I know that there are wonderful examples from both the US and Canada, but perhaps we can hear your perspectives on this particular lever of influence that is perhaps a little muted, or am I wrong in that? You tell me.
John, do you want to go first, and I'll follow? I'll come behind you.
Sure. No, I think there's already a strong latent and actual voice from employers when it comes to support for refugees. There is the Tent Partnership for refugees based in New York, but with members globally, over 300 large corporations who have taken upon themselves to promote employment and support for refugee entrepreneurs and for attention to refugees and supply chains and so forth. There's a newer effort which is aimed more at small and medium-sized businesses in the US called the Businesses for Refugees Pledge. Hasn't had a big public launch yet, but we're in the process of gathering names. We've got 250 businesses on board already. And those can be mobilized for further specific actions. In addition to that, I think we have groups like Upwardly Global who are engaging with Afghan refugees, a nonprofit which takes the refugees and immigrants, other incoming newcomers who have highly skilled, and make sure that they're slotted into employment opportunities that match their qualifications rather than take the first job that comes along, if it's to avoid the sort of brain waste that can take place. So I think there's a lot of initiatives that are in place, and I think you're going to see a lot more in the coming days and weeks as a really massive program of welcome rolls out in the US.
It's good to hear. Jennifer.
So So definitely think that employment is a key part to successful resettlement. There's a few things that we can point to and say these are often the challenges to really helping someone find their footing and launch and succeed in their new country. And employment is a big one. Housing is a huge one. Access to social services, including various kinds of health support, trauma-related mental health support, in addition to physical health support, dental health support. I mean, there's a whole range there. Friendship and cultural support, all these things. And I think for me, the power of sponsorship, just to keep coming back to this one fairly simple policy, is it decentralizes all of that and says, let's solve these sets of issues at the local level for one arriving family. And I think what you do is you then create an easier on-ramp also for some of the willingness to support, particularly amongst more modest organizations. So big corporates will be able to pledge, 5,000 jobs, 10,000 jobs, big numbers, big splashy headlines. But actually at the very local level, it may be that your local grocery store is going to be able to provide 3 jobs to someone, or your restaurant is going to be able to help someone with very few English skills, not only come in and have employment, but also to benefit from some support from the workplace in language training. So, I think that there's something very powerful about not just thinking about the big splashy headlines and the bulk support, but if we can decentralize and get into our local communities, you then have local conversations that are also more tailored to the needs of the individuals. Who's here? What are their skills? What are their interests? What do they want to do? And how can we as welcomers help connect them in the appropriate way to what they want to do as their next step? So I really love the idea that this is a moment both to empower those welcomers, but also through that and with that, we are empowering newcomers, and they really need to be centered in making their decisions. Decentralizing is a big part of how we can do that. Just to close, I do think there's an outpouring of support, and I think Jane pointed to something really critical in all of this. People will tolerate and be patient with not knowing how to engage for some period of time, and that includes corporate actors. But after a period of time, we need to have organized on-ramps for the whole of society approach. So that's incumbent on all of us who work in this space. How do we make sure that it's not 6 months from now that we have a way for an employer to give a job? We've got to make it possible for them to either do it today or know the on-ramp is coming today, so we capture and sustain their interest. And I think that's really important. I don't think people are going to be as mobilized and as interested and as engaged 6 months from now, when those of us in the space might actually be more organized and prepared and figure out what we need. We've got to figure it out quickly so that we can maximize and sustain this tremendous outpouring from both individuals and, as John said, employers and others.
Thank you, Jennifer. I think we have time for one last question, and I want to throw it to Jane because you are physically closest to the region of concern, which is Afghanistan. And the question is, how do you actually get people out of Afghanistan? I mean, we can sponsor all we like, but the logistics of taking people physically out of the country are very, very complex, and I don't understand them. Perhaps you can help me understand this particular phenomenon, especially as Najeeba talked about the women at risk who are still in Afghanistan. How do we protect them? How do we get them out?
Well, that's a tough question for the last question, and I surely don't have an answer, but what I can say is, and I think I saw a comment in the comment box about this, we have to be very careful to try and develop strategies, because otherwise what we're doing is we're forcing people onto dangerous migration pathways with smugglers. And I know that UNHCR is very concerned about that as well. People will end up being killed on borders or trafficked or prostituted. But there are countries that still have embassies in Iran, for example, where we can really be working within those embassies in Iran to evacuate girls or women or people who are at high risk to countries in Europe, for example, or to Australia. So I think we have to get the governments to coordinate. I do think having a global response as opposed to this kind of bifurcated response country by country would be a step in the right direction. I think the other thing is we need to be asking Afghans for information. Najeeba said something that I think is very, very important for all of us to remember. People know they have agency, they have intelligence, they've been, survivors for their entire lives. They know how to guide us on these issues, and we really need to be talking to them.
Thank you all. And with that, on the dot, we are at the end of our discussion, although I know I have 100 more questions to ask all 4 of you, but we can continue the conversation, and I offer this to the audience as well. Please contact the World Refugee Migration Council or me or any of these public figures on an individual basis. This has been absolutely wonderful. Thank you, Najeeba and Sukaina, for providing us with a window into the world in Afghanistan. Thank you, Jen, for being such a global advocate for a wonderful idea with long legs. Thank you, John, for playing your role in bringing United States back into the fold. In what I can hear from you is an exciting, accelerated, scaled up manner. When the United States takes a lead, lots of people set up and listen, and you have leveraged that maybe Canada does not have. So that is terrific news. And Jane, thank you for the information you provided us for a highly specialized but a much, much needed program. I will close by just echoing what we have heard. The situation of refugees is dire. The refugees from Afghanistan and potential refugees in Afghanistan are only going to add to the complexity of the issue. But the moment is ours for grasping. The moment is ours for grasping and taking action so that we both scale up the willingness of governments and citizens to participate in this project, but also to collapse some of these natural, or may I say extended timeframes that create huge problems, primarily for the refugees in need themselves. Thank you very much to the World Refugee Migration Council for hosting this so quickly and nimbly. And we should have more of these discussions on this topic. And I look forward to being in the audience at some time very soon in the future. Thank you all and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.